Hello, good day to you, and welcome back to Down the Donut Hole podcast on May Day.
Yes, it's May Day. And when you even say the word, it makes you feel very springy.
It does, kind of, yeah.
It does, doesn't it? I enjoy this time of year. I look forward to it. There's a certain energy in the air that makes me feel better. I like the coziness of winter. I'm not complaining about it. I get a lot of indoor work done and, just kind of be cozy and have fun inside. But now it makes me want to go out and do fun chores. And that's a real distinction for me, fun chores as compared to pruning hedges. And
well, when you live up north, then that's about the earliest you can expect to be able to go outside without some serious study of the weather.
Well, just a couple of days ago, it was 80-some degrees in New York State, according to my kids.
Maybe.
Yeah. But the problem with it is this time of year, it can swing broadly. You can be 85 in the afternoon and then just plummet. And I think that brings on a lot of spring illnesses because you just don't really know how to dress.
And the first flower appears on today, right? The 1st of May. Mayflowers thing.
You need to go back to the books, dearie.
April showers, May flowers. I mean,
Not the ship. No. Hey, there is a lot of lore about May Day. This is Beltane Day in the Celtic calendar of seasons. And it is a day that is often celebrated with maypoles, which are fertility symbols, echoing the male anatomy.
Oh.
And we'll talk about that in a couple of minutes.
Another one of those things where I'm glad you said that, not me.
I know. I do seem to be venturing into areas that you're too wise to enter. Anyway, so all of that. We're going to talk a little bit about the significance of May Day. And I think it's a beautiful holiday. And today we'll start out with the kind of current news regarding May Day. Today there will be protests all across the United States. It is International Workers' Day, May Day. And here in this country, it's a reference to the Haymarket Square affair, which was a big protest that turned into a riot where workers were trying to get their workdays restricted from 12-hour or longer days to an 8-hour workday, and to have their pay and all the organization around workers considered around an 8-hour day.
Did they choose that because of the May Day tradition, or was it just
no?
Well,
maybe I don't know, but I know that it happened that day, that there was a scheduled protest, and that things kind of got out of control, and that began a very long cessation of work. And so I don't have in front of me how long that went, but it was a long time before they finally got the 8-hour workday established as the standard for the worker. So I think that's all very good. And from that came labor unions and recognition of workers' rights in terms of an expectation of safety and, the kinds of things that for a long time workers in America took for granted, but not anymore. Now we're having a lot of protests just generally because people are insisting that the workers in this country have been treated very unfairly. When your wage for a full day's work is not enough to put food on the table, when you don't have guaranteed health care or even the ability to even think about that. And there are lots of other unfairnesses that have been creeping into the system. And I think people have been pretty much pushed to the breaking point with all of this. And now the protests are widespread. And wise leadership will listen and take into consideration what is being said. And I know that recently, with all of the dismissals and firings at the federal level in our government, and we should be cognizant of the fact that the federal government has been a serious employer in this country for a long time. So, rightly or wrongly, when those jobs get cut, it puts those people in the unemployment lines. And where are you going to go? You know, what's out there? So that 1886 Haymarket Affair in Chicago, that started out this idea of May 1st, the first day, really.
So renewal or, a fresh start kind of thing.
Yeah. So let's clean this up and get started and begin a new, more productive cycle. And that harkens back to the whole idea of May Day as the Beltane Festival, the Celtic Beltane Festival, celebrated with fires, representing a tribute to the god Baal or Bel. And so Beltane, those fires indicate fervor and heat as the days warm up. So you can see a very direct correlation between a bonfire, thinking about the warmth to come as spring gradually turns into summer. And we are at what's called a cross-quarter day in those Celtic calendars. And that means that it's halfway between, in this case, the spring equinox and the summer solstice in June. So just those quarter points in between those things.
Equinox is in June,
No, the solstice is in June.
No, because that means equal, doesn't it? Equal day and night?
Yes, and that's that's March.
Yeah, you're right.
March, around 19th, 20th.
I hate admitting when you're right.
Oh, I know. It must be really hard for you. You're breaking out into a sweat. You everybody heard
It's okay, though, because you are the certified folklorist on the show. So.
Well, I don't know about certified, but I've got lots of books in my library that's fun to look at. I have one book in particular I'm holding in my hand. I wish you could see it. It's kind of a tattered old copy of Curiosities. And that's one of the places I turn to first when I'm looking up the significance of the holidays that we celebrate. And one of the things that particularly delights me about it is it's a connection to the people that have gone before. And certainly with Beltane, with the more, what shall I say, popular holidays that we still continue. I mean, we just talked about Easter, and before that we talked about April Fool's Day, and we've talked about St. Patrick's Day and Fat Tuesday, all of these different little holidays that we still notice and we still celebrate, and mostly in very reduced ways from how they used to be celebrated. But it's still a way of marking the calendar, and I find it very good for people to give a nod to the old important dates, even if they don't mean as much to us today as they did before, just some little recognition, because it breaks the year up, and that is so helpful.
I know a lot of those holidays have been, shall we say, absorbed by a church. That doesn't seem to be the case with May Day, though, unless I'm wrong.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah?
Oh, yeah. They all have. But that's not unusual, and it's not, from what I've read, from what I understand, cultural holidays that the public enjoys, and you're not going to stop them from observing those holidays because they date back so far. It's what you did as a kid, It's what your parents did. And so that continuity, that thread that links you to the observances that your ancestors enjoyed and found important for whatever reason, if you are going to celebrate it anyway, and there are new cultural understandings or new mores that have become much more important in a current time frame, if you can superimpose a meaning on those old traditions that's more current, that fits a new worldview or a new focus.
Doctrine, frankly.
Yeah.
But my question, though, specifically was, I don't, to my knowledge, that hasn't happened with May Day, or has it?
Yes, it has.
And the Catholic has the same day for it or something?
Yes.
Yeah. What's that?
Well, I'll get to that.
Okay.
So that'll encourage you to listen for a little while longer.
Okay.
I know it's hard. May Day, these Beltane festivals, the lighting of bonfires, certainly in England, in Cornwall, in Sweden, places like that in Europe, they would build 2 fires very close together and drive herds between those fires. And when they did that, the smoky action, they would have herbs and plants that they put on these fires so they were really smoky. People, too, would walk between these fires, or in some cases, jump through those fires, And they did that. It was a fumigation. So back in those times, in times well before now, cows, herds, sheep would be kept in winter quarters, because there's not really anything out there for them to forage. All of that would have been stored, and they would be fed in indoor facilities, often underneath people's houses. So a place they would dig down underneath, and there would be an area under there where the livestock would be kept, or an adjacent place that was essentially under the same roof as the family lived. I can't imagine how smelly that must have been, because penned up animals are not known for a lovely aroma. But they would then drive these herds, before they took them out to pasture, drive them through these Beltane fires. And I think it was a slow process, passing through these 2 bonfires built in proximity to fumigate the beasts, because I'm certain that the close proximity, being penned up for all the winter months, would be, they would be very apt to be just loaded with fleas and everything else that would not be nice. And so this is a cleansing process. Smoke is cleansing. And it would be like some of the Native American sweat lodges and things like that, where you're cleaning off the impurities of yourself in an enclosure where there's a fire.
So smelling like smoke may not be a bunch better, but at least it's different. So
well, also, if they know which plants to throw on there, which would have a very medicinal effect.
Sweet grass,
other things like that, maybe pines. I don't know what the specific plants were that they would put on there. But I find that wise in many ways, because it's not like you can just run out and buy pharmaceuticals at the time. I'm sure they had things that they could maybe lather on or something like that. But again, we're talking resource, and passing a herd slowly between 2 smoky fumigation fires makes a great deal of sense when you think about it. And also, you would then turn them loose, and they would be out on the moors in terms of Great Britain, what we now call Great Britain. In Scotland, this is interesting, on May Day, and again, we're talking about the old pre-Christian pagan observations of the first day of May, which would be akin to like the first day of the summer warm weather. And the young boys in the town would go out onto the moors, out where the turfs were, and they would mark out a circle and then dig a trench around that circle. A wide enough trench that all that group could be accommodated there. They could jump down in this trench, and the turf that was left in the center, this circular platform, would become like a table. And so all these young, probably guys mostly, would be jump down in that turf, stand by this table, or maybe they dug themselves what would amount to a bench. So maybe not as deep on the outer edge. I don't know specifically. But then they would take a mixture of egg and cheese. They'd build a little fire, and they'd make what essentially was like a custard. So they're at this table made of turf, and it's still ground level, but they've dug a trench so their feet are below ground level, and this table is perfectly serviceable to them. They'd make this custard, egg, and cheese over this little fire that they built. And they would also cook an oat cake in the embers, a cake of oatmeal and who knows what else. And that cake, they would pull it out and break it up into as many pieces as there were participants in this ritual. And then one of the pieces that came from this broken oat cake, they would char black. And so that one was cooked extra. Then someone would take off their hat. In Scotland, a bonnet. They call it a bonnet. It's not, that word wouldn't be reserved for like baby bonnets or fancy little ladies' hats, Easter bonnets. But even a man's hat at that time is called a bonnet. And you're thinking, when you think about that, think more of a tam kind of thing, that sort of shape hat. So sort of a bowl-shaped soft cap that they would wear on their head. In each of those specifically numbered pieces of that oat cake would be put in there, plus that extra charred piece, that gets put in there. And one of the member of the group becomes the holder of the bonnet. And everyone else chooses a piece out of that bonnet of that oat cake, and they hold it in their hand. And I believe not look at it. The holder of the bonnet takes the last piece. And so we're thinking, okay, what's the marking? What's the charred piece? What does that mean? Well, in the very early days, in the very distant pagan times, the person that held the charred piece was sacrificed to Baal.
Oh.
So you became the sacrificial offering, usually a young man in his prime at this time. I'm not sure about young ladies at that time. I know that the ancient Phoenicians on these fire festivals in the springtime, they sacrificed a baby. And they had statues which were unbalanced enough that they would set a babe in the arms of one of these big statues, and the statue would be easy to tip. The child would fall into a roaring fire, and that sacrifice was, again, for a productive, fertile crop growing season and a wonderful harvest. And it's horrifying to think about all of that.
Yes, indeed.
But that was their understanding, and they felt that this was a capricious God who had the power to bless them with a good crop and harvest, or to punish them, maybe in a jealous snit, for not having received enough attention and the ultimate pay, which is a life, a precious life. And so that entire community, without a good harvest, for whatever reason, not enough rain, not enough sun, the entire group potentially would be killed because of not being able to have enough food to feed themselves in the short term, with enough left over to put it away for the cold months when nothing is growing. Mm-hmm. So when you think about it like that, you say, oh, it's horrific. I can't, it takes my breath away to think about this. But
the idea of blood sacrifice is indeed in the Old Testament. Absolutely.
Absolutely. And
which is troubling.
Yes.
For me, at least.
Yeah. But it's a different worldview. We don't, from our perspective, that is totally unconscionable, but it had been traditional. And when we see even the sacrifice of a newborn lamb or some other consecrated beast, I mean, those are all residuals of human sacrifice. In later times, this ritual, cutting the turf table, making the custard, charring the oat cake, and breaking off the pieces, the person who selected the dark piece, the charred piece, They were not sacrificed in later times, literally. But what they would have to do is jump through the bonfire 3 times. So through and back and through again to the other side. Symbolic. And so I would not like to be the person that had to be jumping through the bonfire.
I wonder if you had to do that in quick succession or if you could take a little time in between.
Now, if it was you, how would you do it?
I'd take the time in between to cool off, you know.
I would want to do it quickly and just get it over with. If I knew I had to, I just want to get that over with and get on with my little party. So that's kind of shocking. Now in Sweden, they would light fires in the cow sheds, the cow houses, of brimstone. A smoky fire in there. Again, now they have a captive herd, and they fumigate the herd inside the shelter. And again, now I can't vouch for in Sweden, but I know that in Britain and certainly in Scotland, a lot of those were attached to the houses. And so by lighting your brimstone, your stinky brimstone fumigation fires inside the cow shed, it would probably, some of that smoke would go into your own home, which would also be beneficial in terms of purifying your house. And then soon you'd be able to open up the windows and clean everything out and make it a lot more wholesome than I'm sure it was.
So you'd have a purified house, but really dirty lungs.
Well, that's it. But in Scotland, I know a lot of those black houses.
Oh, I know. Oh. We visited a few of those, and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, it's wonder, you know, we understand that people from that era and earlier did not have long lifespans, and you can understand why when you've been inside one of those.
Yes. Now, there has always been, almost everywhere, superstitions, I'll say, but it wasn't considered a superstition. It was considered just an understanding that it was a very bad idea to marry in May, in the month of May. And certainly there's rhymes, lots of little adages from almost all cultures. Marry in May, you'll rue the day. Married in May, kirked in green, both bride and groom won't long be seen. Even Ovid has written things discouraging the concept of marrying in May. And most people think that it's sort of got the superstitious bent, but his admonitions against marrying in the month of May were more about that things would be heating up in May, and travel to a wedding party or something like that would be very uncomfortable because you'd be hot and, maybe just the discomfort of it. But I personally think, and this is just me, what month is going to be most useful for the planting of crops? It's probably late April and early May. And so you want to keep everybody kind of on track, which means you're going to be getting up real early and going out there and getting the crops in the ground, planting your seeds or pruning or whatever it is you're raising. The workload in the month of late April and early May is going to be extremely intensive. And if you're a newlywed and in love with your person, you're going to want to be spending time with your person, as much luxurious time as you can. And so getting the crops in the ground is not going to be your priority. And so putting that off to after everything was kind of settled in the ground, that's probably better. And that's probably why those superstitions and adages and all those discouragements for marriage in the month of May for agrarian societies, that's probably the real reason for that.
Yeah. Well, that makes sense, because if there's fertility rituals, and you're at the same time you are advising against marriage, that doesn't seem logical. But if the fertility is for the plants and not the people, then I guess it makes sense.
That's right. That's right. So all of that. And let me look at my notes here. We have, of course, we know that any fertility ritual, any fertility rites or things like that, those are all about rebirth, renewal, about refreshment. Certainly the color green, I read you that little poem, Kirkton Green, means going to church wearing green. Now, green, again, is a symbol of growth, fertility. Think of the land, beautiful green land. It means it's well watered. It isn't dying or dead. And so this is a very sacred time of year. And I think that some of the cultures, certainly the Saxons, they had an interesting idea about May Day specifically, not just the month of May, but May Day specifically. They called it like Tri-Milk Day, because the weather would be so good that they would be able to have 3 milkings a day rather than just 1 or 2 maybe, because the condition of the pastures was so much better as the season advances and we get closer to summer. And so they would be able to really notice the difference as the world comes back to greenness. And so the condition of the herds would be a lot better. And so we have all of that. May marriages have always been discouraged in France. Interesting, the townspeople would go into the woods in many communities worldwide, and I'll say worldwide, but specifically in Europe, in Britain, and in the United States to some degree. They would go into the woods and they would be looking for specific plants. And a few days prior, they would look for what would become the maypole. And they would go in, young men especially, find a tall, straight tree. The taller the better, because there were often competitions between townships. And each town had their own maypole. So they'd cut down the tallest, straightest tree that they could find and dress it out and then bring it back to town. The ladies would have garlands to fit over the top of it and long streamers of ribbon that went from the top of the maypole down to the ground level, allowing for planting it down in the earth a bit. And so that would stand there. And then on May Day, people would dance and sing seasonal songs and happy songs. They would dance. They'd each grab one of those ribbons and then do a specific dance where they were weaving those ribbons in an over and under pattern, so that as they danced, the ribbons gradually were taken up and woven so that they kind of shrouded the pole itself. And so, again, very interesting. The interweaving of the ribbons by the action of the dancers, the skillful dancers, because you have to kind of keep track of which hand should be receiving your neighbor's ribbon and going forward. And the more times that you circle that pole, and the shorter the ribbons get, the tighter to the pole. And I would think that would be so dizzying. And so the fact that they knew these dances well enough and could do them, I'm sure it got to be quite hilarious toward the end, because everybody would have to struggle, I would believe, against
when they got all wound up, did they unwind? Did they go back the opposite direction?
No, I don't think so. No? I don't know about that, Dave, though. I don't think so.
Another question is, does that have any relation to Ring Around the Rosie?
Maybe, but Ring Around the Rosie, Pocket Full of Posies, that song has also a very dark meaning. When they say Ring Around the Rosie, a pocket full of posies, what they're talking about is victims of the Black Death. And so I don't understand all that's the pocket full of posies
so
thing.
the maypole thing would predate that by a lot.
Yeah, in some cases, probably be simultaneous with that, but those are two different things. This interweaving of the ribbons symbolizes the connectedness of the people with the land, with what happens. And because you have this straight pole, which is emblematic of the male influence in fertility, and they would also celebrate...
And it was just females that would go around with the ribbons, right?
I can't say that for sure.
I think I read
so.
that somewhere.
I think so. The maidens would do it.
Mm-hmm.
But there's also lore that talks about the fact that May Day was also celebrated with baskets of flowers. Now, I remember when I was a kid, every season of the year, every month of the year, they always would have some little craft project that we would do in school and take home to mom or give to grandma or something like that. And it was one of the things that we would do is make a paper basket out of construction paper. And do you remember they'd slit those papers into strips, but not cut all the way through, and then you would weave other colored construction paper through those slits and make a little basket. Then they'd close it up on the sides, and we would make paper flowers. And one of the things that was fun to do is you didn't have to give it to your mom or your grandma or anybody specific, but you could surprise someone. And you would hang this paper basket with paper flowers in it, or sometimes real flowers, but mostly paper flowers. You'd hang it on someone's doorknob. You'd knock on the door, hang it on the doorknob, knock on the door, and then run so that they didn't see you. Did you guys do that?
No, but I do curiously remember a couple of actual maypole events that were held, and nobody understood what the history of that was. Having been brought up in a conservative Christian church and all that, it was kind of surprising that they didn't understand that was pagan.
Yes.
But I do remember. How about you? Did anybody actually put up a pole and ribbons?
No, I know that in many Christian communities, under the Puritans here in the United States especially, that was not a welcome thing. Nor did it stay welcome in Britain for certain. When some of the more conservative, more religiously restrictive administrations would come in, they frowned on that. Later, when Christianity became much more widespread in Britain, then the whole concept of the May Day celebration, and particularly with baskets of flowers and things like that. And they had a tradition of May dolls. May dolls, in some places, they would have a doll all dressed up, in beautiful little doll clothes with a small doll on its lap. And they would parade through a town square or, sometimes go door to door with this little doll and the baby on its lap. And that was a reference to the Virgin Mary and, of course, baby Jesus. And so they would go door to door with that. And so that is Christianizing what had been just a fertility doll, essentially, that the young ladies would take around, and that would be sort of, again, a reference to new birth, new life, regeneration, reinvigorating a community. And that kind of thing, as it takes on other meanings, to me, it's if you keep track of how those things began, what they meant originally, and then you see the superimposition of further understandings, of modernized understandings, and then more understandings on top of that, to me those traditions become richer. Now, I haven't heard of, in my experience, there was no maypole dancing or anything like that. I was interested to learn that because I'm interested in those types of things. But these flowers and vessels, if you think about the human female body is a vessel. So any basket, anything like that, is a reference to that. And gourds, the gourd shape looks like a pregnant female shape. A lot of things like that would be like dried and turned into little ceremonial things, painted up pretty and that sort of thing. In some communities, people would take these dolls around or take a basket around. This one that I read that was really quite interesting. Kids would go into the forest and they would raid the nests of magpies for May Day celebrations. They would take the eggs, they would take the little, maybe hatched birdies, put them in a basket and go door to door. And they had a little poem that they would say, and just listen to this. Best loves from Master and Madam Magpie, from all their eggs and all their fry. Oh, give them alms, if ever so small, else hens and chicks and eggs and all, a prey to magpies will surely fall. Now, if I understand magpies, and I did not have a chance to go and fact check this, but I think they're one of those birds that tucks their eggs in other birds' nests. And that way it kind of takes resource away from the birds who are harboring these foreign eggs, these magpie eggs. And that they, in that way, the energy of the host birds would be diverted from their own offspring to the magpies. But also some birds, and it may be magpies too, will basically kill the eggs of the host bird and substitute their own. And in that sense, the kids were essentially blackmailing these households to give alms. And what would happen is the householders then would give the kids some sort of treat or some kind of food, usually, that they raised themselves and had on their shelf. And remember, by May Day, the stuff that they put up from the previous season's harvest would be pretty well depleted in most cases, unless it was a banner year. When the kids say, give me something, give us alms to the magpie, Madam and Mr. Magpie, however small, give us something. And so they would contribute a foodstuff for a May Day banquet later on. And I'm sure they were invited to those banquets. And so everybody would be happy. So any donation to that, they'd get to partake on later on. And I'm sure that people understood that this was going to happen. And so if you have a jar of pickled peppers or something, you'd keep that back on your shelf so you'd have something to give the magpie boys.
So it's kind of like trick or treat, really.
A little bit, yes.
Yeah.
Yes, and so you would give something to contribute to the banquet, which I thought that was interesting. In other cases, also pagan timelines, young boys would they would clip off, of course, when they kill a bull or something like that, they would take the tip of a bull's horn and it would be attached to a long stick and stopped up in such a way. And a bull's horn is not a skinny thing, you know what I mean? So it would be probably as big around as, 3-4 inches, maybe, something like that. And they would station themselves by streams or a gutter that passed through the center of town. And anybody who wasn't wearing an elm, a narrow leaf elm leaf pinned to themselves some way, attached to their outer clothing, prominently on May Day, these boys would have these dipping horns, they'd call them, and they'd dunk them down in a gutter or a stream, and if you weren't wearing the elm, the narrow leaf elm pinned to your person, they would dump water from that gutter. And I'm thinking, gutters in the middle of towns don't sound to me like that would be something you'd want to be anointed with. But if it's a clear running stream, well, then that's one thing. You get that dumped on you. So people would wear these narrow leaf elm leaves. Now, there was a catch with that, though. That didn't get you off automatically. Those narrow leaf elm leaves had to be collected on May Day itself, not the day before. If they were collected the day before, a couple days before, they were called April-May elms, and those didn't count. So you had to be assured and be able to assure others that those had been collected the morning of May Day and that you had gotten them properly. If you didn't have one, or it was found to be an April-May elm, then it would be ripped from you. If you didn't have one at all, and the boys with the dipping horns were about to dunk you with gutter water, you could pay them. You could give them a half penny or a full penny, and they would stop. So they had a little thing for that, a little poem for that too, that if you, hey penny or a good wet back is what they would say.
Hey penny will do.
A hay penny meaning not a penny made out of hay, but a half penny is what that really means. So you could buy your way out of this, and that would be a good thing. So,
interesting.
They also believed that any cows from these cow herds and stuff that had any sort of injury, that those might have been caused by a witch who sent her troll hare, a troll rabbit kind of, to injure your cows. And so when they did their little fumigations from that, they'd be inspected. And then if they found any that had a cut or a wound or some sore on it or something, then they would light another fire out of flints and hold it over the sore on the animal, and that would drive out the witch's evil and restore health to the beast once they got outside. I'm sure a lot of them were not in the most perfect shape after having been penned up for a good few months, at least during the winter months. So we have the May Day International Workers' Day protests. Those are happening today. And we're looking for all the things that have been the stuff of protests right along. Healthcare, better wages, all of that, better conditions. And then we have all of these rich traditions associated with May Day, including some that are now Christianized with the recognition of the Blessed Virgin and the baby Jesus, and that renewal. And coming off Easter just a little bit ago, and certainly April Fool's Day, we talked about the connections of spring and rebirth with that. It's not surprising that this is where we're at right now, and on the astronomical calendar as a quarter day, a celestial quarter day between the spring equinox and the summer solstice. This is rich, and we have to kind of keep the awareness of all of that alive. So,
I mean, hundreds of thousands, if not a million years or more of humanity.
Yeah.
And these kind of traditions that come, who knows how far back, but certainly hundreds of thousands of years at least.
Yes. You know what? We're almost out of time.
And you know what? The first time that I heard a reference to May Day, I thought it was a day where people would ask for help.
No, that's
a distress call.
Nope, it's not. Well, it comes from the French word.
Moi, aider.
Aider.
Help me.
That's right. Help me. So I wish I could help myself to an oatmeal cookie, but now that I fully understand that maybe eating that cookie, now that I understand the connections to human sacrifice, I'm not as keen on that as I was when I first understood that they would make oat cakes out there on their turf table. Anyway, as we always say, do count your blessings and enjoy today. It's spring now, and we have a lot to be thankful for. Don't worry too much about everything. Just keep yourself focused and under control. If you attend a protest, no wild stuff. You don't do it. You don't let people around you do it. We don't commit acts of vandalism. We don't get violent. we say our piece clearly and concisely, and we understand that we have to respect each other.
And listen, listen as well.
Listen and enjoy yourself.
Yep.
Bye now.
Bye now.